So, greetings, friends. Today's talk is on the importance of understanding and developing the context of the Buddha's Dhamma, and understanding the foundational teachings that support developing an understanding of the entire catalog of what the Buddha taught. In the 2,600 years since the Buddha taught and then passed away, there are a nearly infinite number of Buddhist religions, Buddhist schools, and Buddhist practices, all claiming to have originated in what the Buddha taught. Often these later developed teachings are contradictory and very confusing. And the simple explanation is that there's different purposes and different goals in most of these teachings. And they're very inconsistent in what they're presenting in relation to each other. So again, I always have to qualify this by saying I'm not trying to put down or disparage any Buddhist teaching, but the point of this talk and the point of everything that I teach is that the Buddha taught something that was undeniably consistent and really undeniably clear and straightforward. It's only when the teachings are taken out of context or rely on later developed interpretations that have been influenced heavily by the cultures in which they developed in, or charismatic individuals who themselves had no real understanding of what the Buddha actually taught, meaning relying on other teachings and later developed sutras, such as the Heart Sutra, the Lotus Sutra, the Platform Sutra, the Diamond Sutra. These are all examples of later developed sutras that were the foundation for later developed schools. Most of them claiming that the Buddha actually taught these, but they contradict much of what the Buddha actually taught. So the context that I'm speaking of is preserved in the Sutta Pitaka, the second book of the Pali Canon. There's information about how the Sutta Pitakas were first established at the first Buddhist council and how they've been maintained for the last 2,600 years, which is in itself a remarkable story that I won't get into, but I probably will talk about this shortly. But all of that is on my website, becoming-buddha.com, and it's also in my newest book, Becoming Buddha. The Buddha taught, and he consistently stated the purpose of his teaching is to understand the nature of suffering. The words that he often uses, I teach the nature of suffering and the path leading to the cessation of suffering, nothing more. And he repeated that consistently throughout his teaching career. And so everything the Buddha taught was in the context of Four Noble Truths. The Four Noble Truths follow from what the Buddha awakened to, which is taught today as dependent origination. And again, I don't want to make this a very long talk today, but even dependent origination has been misunderstood, misapplied, and often completely changed to support later developed views, rather than seeing the importance of understanding that primary sutta. So dependent origination was taught in the Paticcasamuppada Sutta and many, many other suttas the Buddha cited dependent origination. So the Buddha awakened to the profound understanding that it is ignorance of Four Noble Truths that through 12 observable causative links, all manner of confusion, deluded thinking, and suffering arises. So immediately it can be seen that if what the Buddha awakened to is taken out of context, what follows can have no relation to what the Buddha awakened to or what he hoped to teach. So it is of primary importance to understand that it is ignorance of Four Noble Truths that leads to suffering. It's not of primary importance initially to develop a profound understanding of dependent origination. Just that understanding that it is ignorance of Four Noble Truths points to developing an understanding of what these truths are. It's remarkable today that how corrupted dependent origination has become. In fact, it's hardly ever presented in the way that the Buddha intended it, and how often Four Noble Truths in the Eightfold Path are completely dismissed or altered in a way that they're unusable too. When these are the two primary teachings of the Buddha. Sorry, my dog seems to always need to take a drink during these recordings. The Buddha's very first teaching then was the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, the Sutta on the Four Noble Truths. And in that sutta, the Buddha laid the foundation for everything that he would teach in the next 45 years of his teaching career. In other words, he laid out the context. And everything the Buddha would then teach was taught in the context of dependent origination and Four Noble Truths, so that one could develop a profound understanding of the nature of suffering, their own contributions of suffering, rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths, meaning the way that things really are in the world. And that leads to the next two teachings that the Buddha gave. The Buddha's first three teachings were the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, the Sutta on the Four Noble Truths, the Anatta-lakkhana Sutta, the Sutta on the not-self characteristic, and then the Aditya-pariyaya Sutta, the Sutta on how dukkha arises by giving in to the passions that have developed from ignorant views of self in an impermanent environment. So those first three suttas, the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, can be looked at as an overall understanding of the impermanence of all things. The next sutta, the not-self characteristic, describes the second mark of existence, anatta. And the third sutta teaches how dukkha arises from ignorance of the interplay between wrong views of self within the impermanent environment. So in those first three suttas and through dependent origination, the Buddha laid out his entire context for understanding and developing the wisdom of understanding the life in the phenomenal world. He teaches that all things are impermanent. He teaches that the views that currently we hold that describe a self are rooted in wrong views, and those wrong views give rise to passions, meaning to continue to establish a self in a way that is unskillful, hurtful, leads to dukkha, and is rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths. Now, this directly points to, let me say it this way, that these first three suttas and the overall understanding of the three marks of existence are superior teachings, which points to the understanding, and I don't mean superior in a sense that what follows is inferior in importance, only that the superior teachings are necessary to understand, to establish the context of everything else that follows. So developing an understanding of dependent origination from the Paticcasamuppada Sutta then leads to the importance of developing an understanding and meaning of Four Noble Truths. And that leads to an understanding of integrating the Eightfold Path, the Fourth Noble Truth, as the framework for our Dhamma practice. When we begin to integrate the Eightfold Path, we realize that right view is both the entry to Dhamma practice, meaning it's accepting that right now my view is rooted in ignorance of these Four Noble Truths, and that right view is ultimately the overarching context for an awakened human being, and it's developed through integrating the entire Eightfold Path. So one of the ways to keep a Dhamma practice pure is to focus on what the Buddha taught, because that's the only way we can know that a teaching actually came from the Buddha, rather than some interpretation or accommodation that's used to fit culturally or individually influenced views. And there's no reason not to do that. The Buddhist teachings are well preserved in the Sutta Pitaka. And so I should say that if you're interested in other later developed Buddhist schools, that's fine. But you cannot keep in context what the Buddha taught unless you actually develop what the Buddha taught as a foundation for your Buddhist practice. And that's readily available. My book, Becoming Buddha, explains how to do that. And then to look at some of the later suttas, such as the Satipatthana Sutta and the Anapanasati Sutta. There's a series of talks on both of those suttas on my website. And in order to understand those two key suttas, the suttas on the four foundations of mindfulness and breath awareness, breath mindfulness meditation, the only way to implement those and integrate those properly is with an overarching understanding of the context of what the Buddha taught. So the Buddha taught a singular meditation method called shamatha vipassana meditation. Shamatha means to quiet the mind. Vipassana means to gain insight. And so it's through that quiet mind, developed through proper meditation as described in the Anapanasati Sutta, that supports the refined mindfulness that allows for insight into the three marks of existence. And so in this way, we're keeping the entire Buddha's Dhamma in context, in the context in which he taught. And that relates directly to recognizing, let me say that another way. Through proper meditation and the framework of the Eightfold Path, we're able to develop recognition of our own views rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths, so that we can abandon those views and develop wisdom within the overall context of the Buddha's teachings. And really the only way that the Buddha's Dhamma can be developed successfully is through the appropriate context. And that just makes sense. When you take anything out of context, it loses its meaning, it loses its purpose, and it leads to constant distraction. And that leads again to just the importance of keeping things in context. A mind that is rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truth is a mind that is distracted. Hence the reason why the Buddha taught meditation to deepen concentration, solely to deepen concentration, to avoid a mind rooted in ignorance that is prone to constant distraction, because it is distraction that is the primary strategy used by a mind rooted in ignorance to continue to ignore its own ignorance. The Buddha could have nearly as accurately described the primary purpose of dukkha as saying there is distraction because it is the preoccupation with dukkha, meaning chasing after what gives me pleasure and doing everything I can to avoid anything that might bring me disappointment, and then everything that arises in between, meaning the things that I'm indifferent by, that become the constant distraction away from awakening. So in the proper context, we develop deep concentration through shamatha vipassana meditation. That allows us to support the broader context of the Eightfold Path. And the Eightfold Path continues to guide our practice by maintaining the context of everything that the Buddha taught. So as we develop right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration, and use that as a framework for our Dhamma practice, it will maintain the context of everything the Buddha taught. So when something is outside of that framework, it's simply not Dhamma practice, and it should be seen that way. So again, the importance of developing awakening as the Buddha described awakening is to maintain the context of the superior teachings, and maintain the context, and to develop a well-integrated Dhamma practice that is founded on the heartwood of the Dhamma, meaning the Eightfold Path. So that concludes my talk for today. If you found benefit from this talk, please consider a donation at becoming-buddha.com. And thank you for joining me. Peace.